Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Censored TV. I'm Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. Artificial intelligence is changing the world faster than ever before. From healthcare and education to farming and national security, AI is transforming the way we work. For India, it's more than just a technological shift. It is a powerful opportunity to achieve the goal of Viksit Bharat 2047. The India AI mission aims to democratize AI's benefits across all strata of society, ensuring that it is accessible, affordable and inclusive. But along with great potential come real challenges: deepfakes, misinformation, algorithm biases, as well as security threats. So recognizing these inherent risks, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology has unveiled the India AI Governance Guidelines, a comprehensive framework to ensure safe, inclusive and responsible AI adoption across sectors. These guidelines comprise of 4 key components: 7 guiding principles for ethical and responsible AI, key recommendations across 6 pillars of AI governance, an action plan mapped to short, medium and long-term timelines, and also practical guidelines for industry, developers and regulators to ensure transparent and accountable AI deployment. These guidelines have been drafted by a high-level committee under the chairmanship of Professor Balraman Ravindran, IIT Madras, and also comprising policy experts from the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, the India AI Mission as well as Niti Aayog. We are joined on the program today by Professor Ravindran and committee member Mr. Amlan Mohanty to discuss the details of the India AI governance framework. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the program. At the outset, let me congratulate you both as well as the other members of the committee for such a comprehensive framework that you have given to the country on AI governance, which ensures that AI serves the people, but at the same time it addresses a lot of the potential risks and the harms associated with it. Professor Ravindran, so let's begin the conversation today with you. If you could share with us and our viewers about the approach, the core philosophy that the committee adopted while drafting the guidelines.
Yeah. See, one of the primary driving motivations for us was to not come up with a regulatory document, right? A regulatory framework for AI in India, right? We actually wanted, that's why we even call this the governance guidelines. We don't call it the regulatory guidelines. The reason we call it the governance guidelines is it's as much about, enabling AI adoption, right? As it is about, mitigating and handling any kinds of risks, both societal as well as, technical risks that arise from adoption of AI. But we didn't want that to be the focus in terms of, kind of turning away people from, looking at AI, right? Yeah. Like our mighty secretary said, innovation is still the key focus of our approach to AI, right? Enabling innovation in the AI ecosystem is our key focus. And of course, we will make sure that we have called out all the potential, dangers and risks of adoption of AI, and also have talked about, what are the ways in which we should approach mitigating. It's not like there's a single, one fix for this, right? So we have to take a more holistic approach towards handling AI risks, and that is what the report as well calls out. So it is as much if you look at the 6 pillars, many of them are about enablement, right? 3 of them are about enablement really, and 3 of them are about managing risks. And it's like an equal split in terms of the focus between both innovation as well as risk management. That was the principle with which we started the design. And that's how we have come up with this.
Okay, so we'll also try and understand some of the recommendations that you've made about its implementation, some of the frameworks that are persisting globally, and what kind of inspirations have been drawn in context of India. But before that, let me bring in Mr. Mohanty into the discussion as well. Let me ask you, Mr. Mohanty, when the committee started its work, what was the first big question that all of you agreed that you had to answer in context of how quickly but how prevalent artificial intelligence has become in India today?
Thanks, Tina. Thanks for having me on. I think it's a really important question, right? Which is, what is the foundation on the basis of which this committee is going to begin its deliberations? And I'll say actually the first point of discussion was exactly what Professor Ravindran said, which is on this one hand, India is going to be one of the fastest markets for adoption. We're seeing that across the board with lots of companies, global companies investing in India. So we know that there is going to be adoption of AI rapidly, right, across the billion plus population that we have. So we knew that we needed to have a governance framework that encourages adoption, that encourages investment, that encourages diffusion of the technology across different parts of India. And at the same time, we knew that we were quickly understanding that there would be some potential risks. What those risks are in the Indian context, we still had to understand. But we recognized as a committee and agreed as a committee that we needed to be cognizant of the risks as well. So the first point of discussion actually was to say, there are different global models around the world. The US has taken an approach. The EU has taken an approach. Let's put all of that aside and let's agree as India that we want to do both. That we want both innovation and we want a governance framework that has the agility, that has the flexibility to address the risks as and when they arise. So actually the first point of, I think, agreement within the committee was we don't think of this as a binary. We don't have to choose between innovation or risk mitigation. We can do both. And what's the best way we should do that?
So talking about some of the inspirations perhaps or sort of when you were studying the other existing frameworks, Professor Ravindran, what is it that the committee consciously decided to adopt but reject when it came to India? Because here you had to make a balancing act. You didn't have to stifle innovation and you didn't have to be over-regulatory in nature as well.
Yeah. So, in fact, we looked at, there are not too many geographies which have very elaborate AI regulations already, right? So, we looked at what is there in the world right now, and we consciously chose not to have a significant, overarching regulatory burden on AI developers, right? So, we've decided that the more fine-grained regulatory control should come from the sectoral regulators who understand the real risks and also the challenges of regulating in the respective sectors, and there shouldn't be any kind of heavy-handed overarching AI regulation across all developers and sectors. I mean, they have pointed out a few places where more deeper discussion is needed and more consensus has to be evolved in terms of what regulation should be. But we wanted to clearly avoid heavy-handed overarching regulations, which has been done in some of the other geographies out there. And we also didn't want it to be completely, free for all in terms of everything is done by some kind of a voluntary industry agreement. So that also we wanted to avoid. So we wanted to strike that balance, because in a country like India, right? So we wanted to make sure that, because finally, if you look at the end user, the last mile, if you will, right, in India, it's going to come from smaller companies, from MSMEs, right? It's not going to be the big players who are going to take it to the villages and other final stakeholders in India. So we want to make sure that the regulatory burden doesn't become too heavy on these smaller companies, that they actually shy away from adopting AI and go to other forms of solving the problem, right? So we wanted to make sure that we avoid that. So that is one of the key learning that we took away, because we saw for example, in the EU, by some of the data regulation acts, right, they actually put a much heavier burden of compliance on some of the companies, right? And that actually slowed down the ecosystem quite somewhat, right? Now, I wouldn't say completely slowed it down, but it certainly slowed it down in comparison to the other like the US and China and other places. So we didn't want something similar happening here, so we tried to avoid that. So that is one learning that we had, right? The other one was to make sure that there is guidelines, because one of the things that we heard from the companies is that if you don't give us any guidelines, right, we are going to find it hard to comply. So we might actually be worried about adopting AI because there are no guidelines for how to use it. So we wanted to make sure we avoided that as well. So that wanted to strike the balance. And
in fact, when you talk about striking the balance, Professor, I'm curious to know, how did you factor in the Indian reality? For example, we are a multilingual society. Then there is this aspect of government service delivery. There is a significant digital divide as well. So how did you incorporate all of that into the framework to send out a message that these governance guidelines pertain strictly to what India or the Indian society is reflective of?
So, first thing is, the guidelines is a guideline, right? So we have not made anything that is extremely prescriptive. yet, right? So it's basically what we have pointed out is, first thing, it has to be a whole of government approach.
Right.
So that is what the AI governance committee we are calling for, right? The governance group should incorporate stakeholders from all ministries and all kinds of applications that we would take it to, including public service delivery and everything, right? So all of that should be kind of guided by a more holistic approach and not taken individually. I don't think any other geography actually has taken this whole of government approach to AI governance yet. So that is one thing which we are making sure that every stakeholder gives input to this. The second is about the multilinguality and other kinds of India specific risks. So in the narrative in the document, right? So we have actually talked about all of these India specific things, and we have called for a larger effort, probably through the AI safety institutes, in order to explicitly lay out these India specific risks. Right now we don't. I mean, we talk about this at a very high level, right? But when you want to get down to the implementation level, we don't have enough detail, right? We don't have that laid out yet in India. So that's something that we are calling out, and we are saying that the AI Safety Institute should build, the support structures in order to mitigate these kinds of risks, right? So so that is something that we have actually pushed for in the report itself, right? So.
Okay. So before we go on to some of the suggestions that you've made on its implementation and how forward-looking can it be in terms of, can it translate into a legislation? That's something that I'll ask you in just a bit. But I also came across a paper that you've written, Mr. Mohanty, on making AI self-regulation work, perspectives from India on voluntary AI risk mitigation. You've outlined a practical policy roadmap for our country. You've argued that voluntary or self-regulation frameworks can help manage AI risks without stifling innovation. That's exactly, that's a lot of what we've seen in the final draft that's been released by METI and all of the experts who have pitched into coming out with this kind of a report. But tell us about something that stands out for you in the India context. And I ask you this because India, while having the advantage of demographic dividend, also has a global AI talent pool.
Absolutely, Tina. And that's exactly why we think voluntary frameworks actually are a useful tool. What voluntary frameworks really mean is that companies, organizations in the private sector and the public sector come together and agree as a whole, as an industry, right, about what are the technical steps that are required, as well as operational steps that are required to identify the risks and to mitigate those risks. And the talent pool that you are talking about is exactly why we think a voluntary industry-led approach is one way in which we can mitigate these risks. The people who are building these technologies are the people who actually are closest to understanding what these harms and risks are. They are the people who are running stress tests, red teaming tests, doing vulnerability checks, vulnerability assessments, risk assessments. They're generating reports. They do a lot of these experimentations, these tests before they deploy them publicly. So it's actually the rich talent pool in India, but around the world, in these research labs, in these companies that are closest to understanding both the dangers and the capabilities of these models. So a voluntary approach in many ways can help address that. But also, let's be clear, and this is the point that Professor Ravindran is making today. It's the point that METI Secretary Krishnan made in the press conference yesterday, is that if there is any need arises, if we find that in the Indian context, there are certain types of risks or harms that are emerging in the AI context, we will be prepared to, through appropriate legal regulatory instruments, mitigate that risk. So let me give you an example of a type of kind of risk that is increasingly being discussed, which is the risk to vulnerable groups, right? This could be impact on women. And so there is obviously a conversation around the impact of deepfakes in the Indian context. METI just released some draft guidelines. And there is evidence of AI-generated content being used to target women through, what's called non-consensual sexual imagery or revenge porn. There's also evidence of, children being impacted potentially by, chatbots that can manipulate behavior, create addictions. So these are the types of risks we need to understand in the Indian context. How are the children and women of India actually engaging with, interacting with AI systems? And what are the voluntary steps that companies are taking to mitigate these risks? If there is a gap in what is the expected outcome that we have as a society, as regulators, as the government, and the types of efforts that industry bodies, companies are taking, that gap needs to be filled through additional regulatory mechanisms, and that's what we've recommended as the committee.
Given how we've seen a technological transformation over the last few years, Professor, this was a much needed roadmap. But what are the suggestions or recommendations that the committee under your chairmanship has made on the implementation? Because it's not a legislation, it can't be binding in nature, but how will you ensure that what you've suggested actually is translated into some kind of action, it's implemented and you see tangible results?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that we have suggested there, right? So the first one is that we really need to revisit the sectoral regulations that are there, right, and see in what way these are being challenged by the adoption of AI, right? So what you are talking about in terms of the things that can be enforced and so on and so forth is already a large fraction of the AI harms are actually covered by sectoral regulation, right? So in terms of enforceability, so it is basically to go back and educate people on, look, what are the AI harms that can result, right, in your particular sector, and how do the existing laws and regulations cover that? In fact, some of the things about misrepresentation through deepfakes and so on and so forth can potentially be addressed with existing regulation, right? But then that needs to be bought out, right? So there's a little bit more necessity to perhaps maybe reinterpret some of the laws in terms of AI usage. But that is one part of it, right? So we have actually talked about educating different sectors and the government bodies and so on and so forth on what is the challenge that the AI brings to their particular sector. So that is one part in terms of enforceability. The other thing which we have talked about is to create a whole kind of a governance structure, right? So including the AI advisory, like a governance body, and then the technical council that advises the governance body and the whole AI safety institute. This entire infrastructure that needs to be created, that's going to continuously monitor the happenings in the AI field, because there's no way we can make binding regulations today that will even be relevant 6 months down the line. Right? I mean, things are changing so rapidly. You have to come up with an agile framework in which you can address the harms that come out of AI. So we recommended that very strongly in terms of setting up these governance structure, so that will continuously track this. So that's another actionable thing that we have talked about. Mm-hmm. And hopefully, I mean, at the end of the day, like yesterday when Secretary Krishnan was talking, these are finally at the end of the day guidelines, not binding on the government at all. But the government, having invested so much effort and time, and our investment also in terms of building these things, I think this is a reasonable guidelines which the government, at least large parts of it, would be adopted by the government.
Okay, so while these guidelines will lay a sufficient foundation for now, given the risks that persist, but do you think India will eventually need a standalone legislation in this regard? And could this governance architecture that you've provided, could this evolve into a legislation at a later stage, Professor? Do you see the potential?
So I don't know if there is right now we don't see the space for an overarching AI legislation at all. I mean, so there is the IT Act. I mean, there is the DPDP. I mean, which are actually overarching in nature, right? They are not sector specific in some sense. But apart from that, do we need an AI Act at this point of time? I'm not convinced. But again, the government stance is, hey, right now we are worried about innovation, but if it needs if a stronger regulatory bill needs to be introduced, and the government is ready to work on that, and these bodies that we are creating are going to advise the government on how to take this forward, right? So if you ask me today, do we need to pass an AI bill? I don't think yes at this point, but going forward, things will change. Things are rapidly evolving. Certainly. And the structures that we create. Yeah.
For now, let's hope for the effective implementation of these guidelines that you've come out with. To wrap up the conversation, Mr. Mohanty, as we try to balance between the advantages and the risks associated with AI, Niti Aayog has been talking about AI as a national tool for our Viksit Bharat 2047 vision. What are some of the concerns, misconceptions about AI governance that you would like to allay for our viewers from this platform today?
Look, first of all, I think, AI is clearly a very transformative technology. I think we all need to recognize the opportunities that, it really provides. And, we've been talking on this program about, the unique kind of demographics of India. For a country like India, I think, AI can really serve as a tool for access, for empowerment, in areas like agriculture and healthcare and education. So I think it's really about understanding what these potentials are. And let's be very clear, AI is not a new technology. I know there's a lot of buzz about AI, but it's actually been around since the 1950s. What's been very recently being adopted is a specific type of technologies, these emergence of large language models, generative AI technologies. But this is not the end of the road, right? We're going to have agentic AI where AIs can act autonomously. They can act in ways where they can, act in physical environments, digital environments. There is massive opportunity here. And that's why, bodies like Niti Aayog are very bullish about the potential impact of AI for the digital economy. And so if you're thinking about the largest strategic goals of India when it comes to Viksit Bharat, about socio-economic development, about national security, about economic growth, about resilience, AI, artificial intelligence, is a foundational transformative technology that can help us achieve those goals. So I would really like to speak to our fellow citizens and say, let's understand this, let's get behind this and see kind of how far it can take us.
Especially when we are seeing that all the efforts of the government, of all the stakeholders involved, the focus is on building an ecosystem that fuels innovation but also strengthens the AI economy. We've been talking about how AI can prove to be a national development tool towards realizing our Viksit Bharat vision, and we are happy that efforts towards that have already been being made. It's just that we need to also ensure that we use AI responsibly. Time allows us to take up only that much on the program today. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the program, sharing your thoughts, your views with us and our viewers. To you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well.
Thank you.
To watch more programs of Sansad TV, subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to like and share them.